Take my hand. I'll lead you into death. By a whisper in the shadows on AO3. Episode 30. Chapter 17. Katsuki groaned, cracking his back as he shuffled his way back to his room. Shitty black coffee in hand. Technically, his nurse said he wasn't allowed it, but he felt he fucking deserved it. He hated hospitals, and he hated hospital food. The least he could get was some damn coffee, even if it was weak and burnt and just crappy. He left Izuku in the room. He was only going to be gone 5 minutes. Izuku could survive that long alone. Plus, it was easier to sneak around when it was only one of them. And Izuku's looks weren't exactly subtle. Besides, nothing could possibly go wrong within 5 minutes. Katsuki froze when he pushed his room door open. The tension in the room was disgustingly thick. Izuku stood near the windows, hands clenched by his side. Across from him, with their backs to Katsuki, stood the number 2 and number 5 heroes. Izuku hardly glanced at Katsuki, his sole focus on the two Oakers. Hawks cleared his throat, shifting on his feet as Katsuki let the door close with a soft thud behind him. Miracle called, too loud in the small room. Katsuki grumbled, keeping his eye on Izuku, seemingly tenser form as he was dragged into a crushing hug. Izuku stole attention, had moved from Mirako, ignoring Hawks completely. Told you not to call me that, Carrots. Katsuki growled, darting away from her as she went to hit him across the head. Hey, fucking concussion, woman! Now don't be dramatic. And I told you not to call me that. Hawks cleared at their antics, laughing as harder as Katsuki avoided another smack and threw his middle fingers. Any of Katsuki's humor vanished at the cold look in Izuku's eye. He tugged the boy's wrist, and he moved to the bed, bringing Izuku's attention back to him. Good people, he whispered, maneuvering the young boy to sit next to him again. It's okay. They're okay. Fucking okay, okay? Izuku flickered his eyes between the two heroes, and Katsuki, a couple of times before giving him a curt nod. He settled in his seat, back still taut, but Katsuki would take what he could get. He sighed as he sank into the bed, turning to glare at the intruders. Well, is there a reason for you disturbing my fucking rest? He grumbled, letting Izuku put his fingers. He pointedly ignored the hero's eyes on their hands, glaring at them for good measure, when they took too long to answer. What, you too good for me now? I can't care about my little intern? Mirako scoffed. Katsuki narrowed his eyes at her. It wasn't that he didn't believe her, he just didn't believe it was the only reason. Uh-huh, sure. That doesn't explain Big Bird over there. Hawk startled at being addressed, finally moving his attention from Izuku. He laughed lightly, rubbing the back of his neck. Ah, yeah, I guess I was just a bit curious? He said, shrugging. Katsuki knew Izuku was paying attention to the conversation. Izuku didn't talk a lot, and when he did, it was often stilted and hesitant. Unlike what many people thought, however, it wasn't because Izuku was stupid, or that he hadn't had a proper education. Well, technically he hadn't, but his knowledge on the school subjects wasn't near up to scratch. His general intelligence? Mind-fucking-blowing. Even as a kid, Izuku was always near top of the class. The only reason he never beat Katsuki was because he was constantly studying over shit that wasn't solely school-based. Plus, Katsuki's ego would never let him win. Katsuki wasn't sure what kind of education whoever took Izuku would have given him, if they had given him any at all. Even he worried when Izuku was first reintroduced into his life. Izuku didn't speak like he used to, and boy did he used to. But he could read and write just fine. His ability to analyze quirks seemed to get even better, and then there was his knowledge on support gear, weaponry, and fighting in general. After a while, Katsuki began to understand the lack of speaking was a defensive mechanism, a strategy to remain with the upper hand, even as a prisoner. That didn't make him stupid. In fact, it was quite the opposite. He watched, observed, listened. He took everything in, even when the most things people wouldn't see, wouldn't understand. Izuku was brilliant. Which meant Izuku knew exactly who Hawks was. He knew what Hawks meant by him being curious. Probably more than Katsuki understood. He felt a small pang in his heart at the thought of what Izuku would have acted like if he was never taken away. His eyes would have lit up, his smile staringly bright, and he would have pounced on the hero with a million questions. Izuku didn't do that now, especially not with Hawks. Izuku knew Mirako. He had technically met her when he was arrested. Plus, Katsuki talked about her a lot. Mirako was a hero. To Izuku, Hawks was not. Katsuki was doing homework, rubbing his face in frustration. Izuku sat next to him. Surprisingly, Izuku wasn't doing his own work, nor was he attempting Katsuki's homework, as he so often did. Instead, his sole focus was on the television. Katsuki glanced over. It's Hawks. Izuku looked back at him. The number 2 hero. He's actually pretty cool, but if you ever met him, don't tell him I said that. Man's got the biggest fucking ego. Katsuki turned back to finish his work. After another minute, he looked to Izuku again, whose attention was back on the screen. On it, Hawks was smiling wide after a victory, laughing and waving to his fans as he flew over them. Katsuki couldn't help but want to smile with him, even if the fucking chicken could be annoying as hell. Izuku did not look like smiling. Izuku looked as though he were about to cry. Sad, he whispered before going back to his own work. Sad? Katsuki repeated. Izuku simply nodded. Silence fell over them as the young one wrote. Katsuki couldn't help to stop thinking about what he said. He didn't understand what Izuku meant, couldn't fathom what was sad about the image on the screen. Just when Katsuki was thinking Izuku was done with the conversation, he spoke again, handing Katsuki a page. Katsuki's breath hitched. He knew Izuku could draw. It was one of his talents. The image he presented Katsuki with was incredible. Hawks was so realistic, his smile shining just like real life. The talent wasn't what surprised Katsuki, though. It was what else was in the drawing. Though smiling, his eyes leaked dark tears, a large shadow looming over his head. The fateless shadow held the edge of Hawks's wings. Hero written across the top of the page, though it had been crossed out in red. Weapon was written at the bottom. A bird with clipped wings will always be trapped, even if they're released from their cage. The hospital door closed, had Katsuki jumping from his mind. Detective Tsukaji stood holding a brown bag. He smiled through his obvious confusion as he looked at the people in the room. I brought muffins, he said, lifting the bag. He scrolled closer to Katsuki's bed, dropping the bag on his lap. I'm glad I picked up extra. Wasn't expecting you two here. Katsuki slouched in his bed, a wave of exhaustion brushing over him. He ruffled through the bag as the adult spoke, pulling out one that smelled of spice and apple for himself, and a chocolate chip for Izuku. He still cursed Tape Arms, Pinky, and Candy Crush for introducing Izuku to chocolate. When Izuku didn't immediately take the muffin, Katsuki turned to where he was with a frown instead. He was met with empty air. Glancing towards the adults, he realized Izuku had moved closer to them. He was still watching Hawks, though not much with as trepidation. In fact, the boy just seemed curious about the hero's wings, watching their movements as they talked. Katsuki was about to warn the hero about Izuku and how he forgets people's personal boundaries, when he realized Hawks was moving his wings on purpose. He kept extending and retracting them, allowing them to follow the movements of his arms. When he glanced to Izuku, he was smirking, not allowing the boy to get a hold of the feathers. Izuku huffed in annoyance, turning back towards Katsuki. Hawks chuckled at his pout, abandoning the conversation with the other adults. He released a couple of feathers to swirl around Izuku, ruffling through his hair. The room laughed at his indistinct squawk, Katsuki joining. Hawks allowed Izuku to hold on to the feathers, inspecting it thoroughly. Tsukachi stepped forward, his smile sad. Katsuki instantly alert. Izuku, I'm gonna have to ask you to come with me. Katsuki was not impressed in the slightest that he wasn't allowed to go with Izuku. He knew they had their reasons. He was pretty much barred up, and Izuku was going to be the only person who wasn't an adult allowed in the meeting. But it was still pissing him off. The detective said that he would defend Izuku, no matter the cost. Katsuki knew Aizawa would be there too, as well as a lot of other people who would be surprisingly defensive for Izuku. He knew Izuku was in good hands. He had to admit to himself he was just terrified of losing him again. We'll be there too, you know. We just want to check up on you. How are you doing? Miracle told him a couple minutes after Izuku reluctantly left. Plus, I, for one, wanted to see the greenie for myself. Hawks admitted. He was still smiling, but it was sad. More honest than the rest of the world sees. The commission... They're gonna want me to agree with them. Izuku, he's a very powerful resource. They don't just want to lock him up, especially after watching him take down those Nomu. They want to use him. Smoke rose from Katsuki's bed, where his hands gripped the sheets. It wasn't like he didn't know that. Anyone could see how impressive Izuku was, especially after the Nomu attack. I don't want that, Hawks continued. I didn't want it before I met him, and I certainly don't do now. He put a strong hand on Katsuki's shoulders. We're on your side, Kit, Miracle said, waiting by the door. Besides, Izuku's special. He's got a way of getting under your skin, eh? Katsuki couldn't help himself but smile as the two heroes bid their goodbyes. That he does indeed. What Shouta would do to be anywhere but that room. He rubbed his temples, willing his headache to subside. Listening to the commission's nonsense was difficult enough on a good day. Listening to them get nowhere after 2 hours with a steady increase headache, while he could be sitting at home with his daughter. A goddamn nightmare. Hizashi squeezed his knee, nodding to the boy next to him. Izuku had kept his head down throughout the entire time of the meeting, stiff in his chair, back rimrod straight. Glancing down, Shouta noticed red seeping through his fingertips as Izuku clenched his hands tight. They had already been in the meeting an hour and a half when Tsukachi brought Izuku in. The cold reception he received was, in Shota's books, disgraceful and pathetic. They all seen Reaper's mask, behind by a mistake of past. They can't see Izuku's as a boy. They can't see how he quivers, how he can't hold eye contact, how he was unable to just be a 16-year-old boy. Shouta supposes they will never get that chance to be just a kid. Reaching over, Shouta tapped at Izuku's wrist, allowing his scarf to fall into the boy's lap to pull Izuku. Izuku jolted, frowning at his cut hands. Leaning over, Shouta murmured that it was okay, that he just needed to be careful. Another thing the commission disagreed with was apparently treating a hurt child like the child they were. Hizashi stiffened next to him as one of the suits scoffed, hands clenching painfully on his leg. Glancing up, Shouta noticed the conversation had died down. Most people focused on Izuku and his interaction. I mean, he should at least be in handcuffs. Shouta wasn't sure who had said it, but his attention was no longer wavering. Before he could come to the boy's defense, Hawk spoke up and said, "Oh, come on, Mackie. So the kid broke a couple rules. That's hardly warrants cuffs." He laughs airily. It surprised Shouta. Hawks very rarely stood up against anything the commission said. Mackie bristled in his seat, glaring at Hawks. Before he could counter the young hero's comment, however, a low voice demanded the attention of the room. All of Hawks' carefree demeanor vanished. By law, Hawks, dangerous personnel and criminals are required to wear handcuffs. The Grim Reaper is, as far as I'm aware, both of these things. Everyone stood to the welcome of the commissioner. He waved a hand in dismissal, sitting himself at the top of the table next to Endeavor, briefly acknowledging everyone in the room and on the screens that lined up the walls. Hanzo sat stiff on the other side of him, her old alteration attitude nowhere to be found. Occasionally, she would glance at Izuku, a frown on her lips, brows furrowed in contemplation. Shouta took Hisashi's hand under the table for his own comfort. He placed his other hand on Izuku's shoulder in what he hoped was reassuring. Shouta stopped himself from smiling at the young boy who leaned into his touch. The commissioner cleared his throat. As is, there was someone in that class who was very important to me. Someone whom Midoriya Izuku saved. He smiled genuinely at Izuku. So I will permit the lack of handcuffs. His smile dropped. Unfortunately, there are other pressing issues we must direct today. Midoriya Izuku, you and your carriers were given a set of rules. You left the campus of UA, not only without permission, but without any supervision. Breaking one of the main rules provided by the Commission, your actions were violent and aggressive and broadcasted for all of Japan to see. I have half a mind to arrest you right now. Shouta gripped on Izuku's shoulders tighten, just as his husband's hands tightened on his own. With all due respect, Commissioner, Izuku is the only reason our daughter is alive, as well as those little listeners. Who's to say what could have happened if he wasn't there? Though his voice was calm, Shouta could tell how furious he was. It was true that most heroes, and those in the Commission, knew about the relationship in Eri, but they tried not to bring attention to it too often. That slip was enough to know Hizashi's emotions were all over the place. With the way this meeting was going, Shouta wasn't far behind him. Who's to say he wasn't the reason it happened in the first place? Mackie from earlier spoke up, scoffing. Multiple voices spoke up to that. Oh, come on, Mackie. Hawks. Shove it, old man. Mirko. I counter. Suit. I also agree. Reaper should have been locked up the moment we had hands on him. There is no need to make rash accusations. Endeavored. Weird. I beg your pardon. Shouta whispered lowly and deadly, silencing the room as his hair rose. Mackie scoffed again. I mean, honestly, Eraser, we haven't had a Nomu attack in months. Now we have Reaper in our clutches, and there's two attacking not only something that the Commissioner cares for, but something you and the carriers of Reaper also care for? It's a lot of a coincidence. Shouta felt himself stand, hands pressing firm against the table. Mackie stood up too, purple eyes glancing right back at him. A small smug played on his lips. That's an awful serious accusation. Shouta spat. I'm just stating the facts, Eraser. Facts we can all see. Just because children make you soft doesn't mean Reaper isn't... Izuku is an innocent child. He saved Eri along with every other child there. He only broke the rules to do good. McKinney slapped his fingers. There's another thing. Just how did Reaper know to take down those Nomu? Izuku, Hizashi said, standing up as well. He is no longer Reaper. Izuku, Mackie said slowly. How close you have gotten. Another addiction to your ragtag family, I suppose? We are not here to discuss personal matters such as our family. Shouta hissed. No! Mackie clapped his hands loudly. We are here to discuss your little That is enough, Max. Hanzo shouted, voice above the rising chaos. No, Hanzo! Mackie, or Max, continued. No, it most certainly is not enough. You were taken off Reaper's case the moment you made comment about the poor boy being so young. And wasn't that news to Shouta? Like many, you have forgotten what Reaper did! What he is capable of doing! This! Max waved his hands towards the screen playing the Nomu fight. This should be a reminder enough of the danger Reaper poses. He's not just a boy, he's a weapon. Not to mention the brainwashing of the entire police force. Who knows what kind of other forces are working behind the boy? Who knows what lies he's fabricated to slip freely into our world? There isn't a single quirk in the registry with that kind of power. Izuku's voice was so quiet. But still, the room went silent. Though everyone had now turned to him, Izuku's attention stayed focused on his lap. Okay, alright. I'm not gonna say much, mainly because I don't know the outcome. I have no words. All I'm gonna say is I'm scared, and I think you guys are scared too. So, as always, my raindrops, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds. Have a wonderful day or night. Link to my Discord server, merch shop, and socials are down in the description. Subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.